next speaker, Sushumna Kannan. Dr. Sushumna Kannan is going to speak on Jaati Varna as based on violence and non-violence, violence and non-violence. She is a scholar. She has got a PhD in Cultural Studies from Center for Study of Culture and Society, Bangalore, India. Her research on the South Asian devotional traditions and feminist epistemology focused on the medieval mystic Akka Mahadevi and her vachanas. She received the Bose-Mira French Research Fellowship in 2006 and 2007 and Sir Ratan Tata Fellowship for PhD coursework and writing in 2003 and 2007. She has published some of her research work on Bhakti and Dharma Shastras and has an essay on translation theory. She has completed a book project on Hinduism, violence and non-violence, and is currently working on a translation of the Yoganga Trividhi by Akka Mahadevi, and on a research project on the position of women in the Manusmriti. For her writings, visit sushumnakannan.weebly.com. Dr. Sushumna Kannan, over to you. You are muted.
Apologies. Thank you, Nagaraj, for this opportunity. I'm very happy to be here. What I'm sharing today is part of my book, and it's been a while since I'm doing this. I've extracted a portion of my book for this presentation. You've asked me to share my screen, so I'm going to do that now. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Is it
yes.
visible?
Yeah, we're able to see. Yes.
Okay, so basically my presentation is a little bit different from what others have done today. What I think the others have done today is of course a variety of things, but also mainly they've pointed out how the existing theories of Varna Dharma, if you like, are inadequate. They've shown this by exposing several anomalies. But to my mind, what is more important than this task is to come up with a theory of Varna Dharma. Also, it's not enough to simply point out anomalies in the existing theories. So my understanding is that we can never run away from the question, what is the underlying principle of Varna Dharma? And this fundamental question will always haunt us, and therefore we must strive to answer it. And I believe that answering it will lead to true decolonization. So, so I'm taking up Declan Quigley's question, is a theory of caste still possible? And my answer is yes. I'm going to do this by saying that the basis of Varna Dharma is violence and non-violence. I'm going to read from here. Contrary to popular opinion, which deems Varna Dharma as based on hygiene, or scholarship, which deems it as based on hierarchy, my argument will be that it is based on a problematization of violence, an upholding of non-violence, and as such, the distinction between violence and non-violence. Varna Dharma upholds non-violence and distances itself from violence. Why? Going by the myths, because the gods detest violence. If we were to view it as an ethical system instead, then we could say that there is a problematization of violence. But are the gods not violent? Going by the myths, yes, but they are violent in a selfless way, only to protect humans and other creatures. They have a bone to pick with those who are violent and enjoy cruelty, for example, the Rakshasas. Thus, to enter heaven, non-violence is a must, and this you will find in the long dialogue with Yudhishthira and Nahusha in the Mahabharata. Going by the myths again, Brahma creates the Rakshasas as well. They too are his sons. In some myths, he has created them in a moment of anger. If we were to view these myths in simple ethical terms, secularizing them a little bit, then violence and non-violence are both tendencies found in all creatures. Self-control is necessary for a civilized society to flourish. An acknowledgement of this is found as early as the Vedic sacrifice, wherein there is a mention of earlier times which were barbaric, wherein the sacrificial animal was beheaded but later strangulated. And then there were hymns of hymns for a painless ascent to heaven, which were recited. We could say that the Vedic sacrifice is indeed the first teacher of nonviolence, as also a teacher of how we must respectfully cohabit with our fellow beings through a proper give and take transaction. The Vedic sacrifice itself could be and has been problematized for its violence, but for now we must view it as honoring the food chain, wherein those above and below us are all acknowledged. There is an environmental ethic to it, an argument that is not entirely unknown. Requesting the vanaspati for fruit and other such references also teach non-violence in the Vedas, but I shall skip them all to save time here. Now, expecting everyone to be non-violent was likely unrealistic. Hence, Varna Dharma, a gradual, graded process ensuring harmonious living as well as an ascent to self-mastery was likely advocated. This is evident in the profile of the 4 Varnas and their specific relationship with violence. The profile of the 4 Varnas, if I were to quickly chart them here, the Brahmins had to be non-violent everywhere except in the yajna. Non-violence confirmed upon Brahmins the purity required to perform sacrifices. They had to accept and expiate the impurities caused by sacrificial violence for the yajnas they performed. And the Manusmriti declares cooks and agriculturists as not really Brahmins, because these occupations entail violence to vegetables and spices in the kitchen and to the earth. Manu allows Brahmins to choose non-violent occupations if they are unable to earn a living through the performance of sacrifices. Brahmins could not receive food from hunters, the intoxicated, the angry, thieves, Dikshita, because he has the taint of sacrificial violence, weapons dealers, and cooked food from Shudras, because Shudras were in violent professions. A Brahmin could not even take up a weapon to examine it. Now, Kshatriyas could use violence, but only to protect and punish. This is confirmed by the story of the rod of punishment told in Manusmriti as well as several other texts. Now, Kshatriyas could consume meat to keep up, but only to keep up their physical strength, and they offered it to the gods before consuming, converting it into a sacrifice. Hunting was mostly for target practice for them, and excessive hunting was considered a vice. Dying on a battlefield ensured entry to heaven. The Vaishyas could be vegetarians, but were agriculturalists, hence they hurt the earth as well. So this is an animated world where water, earth, all of these are being consumed by us, and therefore we are violent. All of us are. So in the Vyada Gita, there is an interesting passage where the Vyada asks, is agriculture really, free of violence? Now the Shudras were more explicitly in violent professions. They were tanners, butchers, hunters, oil press workers, and other such occupations. More importantly, they were meat eaters. Before we proceed, I want to point out to 2 different ways of thinking about Varna Dharma or Dharma in general. One is through a rights and duties framework, where, for instance, you could say each Varna did one thing and received another kind of protection, for instance, in the case of Brahmins, in return. So Brahmins performed sacrifices and taught Vedas, and in return, they would not be killed. So similarly, each Varna did something and received something in turn. So this was a way of give and take. Now, this is one way to view Varna Dharma. Another way to view is through the prism of self-interest and altruism. Now, so all the duties of all the 4 Varnas can be viewed through either of these lenses. And when we view it in the second sense, through self-interest or altruism, the focus is again on, people like the cow and the Brahmin who have, and whoever has the lowest carbon footprint is considered a sustainer, and sometimes considered divine. So in this case, we have in the altruistic framework, we have the cow and the Brahmin who sustain us in various ways by giving up their own pleasures. Therefore, and they consume very less. Brahmins were not supposed to accumulate wealth at all. Therefore, these two figure as important people in the altruistic framework. They're the top in this particular framework. So there's a reason why I've mentioned this. It helps us to analyze as we go forward. So basically, my fight obviously is with Dumont, but in Quigley's essay, he makes a list of things that a theory of caste should address, and the attempt in my presentation today is to keep both these things in mind. So in my response to Dumont, I'd like to say that Dumont's ethnographies did yield him answers that were very meaningful. So purity as derived from non-violence is an argument that was offered to Dumont by the indigenous voices of India as late as 1966. But he labels them as the rationalization of Brahmins who are prejudiced against taking up agriculture. So what he does in his book is simply he draws up a list of actions fitting into pure and impure actions, and that doesn't help him explain much at all. Now, let us consider the three locations that Dumont focused upon to analyze caste. I'm using the word caste. Let's retain it for the moment, and see if we can analyze them through the prism of violence and non-violence. So, firstly, commensality, which refers to rules about whom one can dine with or cannot do so. These rules work with the belief that there is a karma transfer happening upon seeing Brahmins eat. So this is bad for the Brahmin as well as for others. It is bad for the sacrifice a Brahmin performs, since the Brahmin's non-violence karma is reduced and violence karma of the other castes go to him. It is bad for others because the sins of sacrificial violence transfer to them, and they have no way of expiating it constantly like the Brahmins do. Because they are engaged in other full-time professions. Thus, sitting in a pankti was followed. So basically, everything that is a criteria for Dumont, I'm explaining in terms of violence and non-violence, and we'll see how this holds up. Now, endogamy is simply marrying within one's caste, and different castes follow different professions, some violent, others non-violent. A mixing of this results in losses for those who have been non-violent. So hence, it's my understanding that endogamy was upheld, and although endogamy was upheld, an upper caste man marrying a lower caste woman was somewhat acceptable. And this, I think, is because, again, how karma sharing was thought to work, that the wife now, shares her karma with the husband, but the husband is constantly expiating if he's an upper caste person. And so then there is no loss of non-violence karma in this case. Whereas an upper caste woman marrying down is a problem because there is an irreversible loss of her non-violent karma. And then again, untouchability. Prima facie, this appears to be discrimination against a group of people. But what underlies the distancing is, again, their occupational violence. That is, those in violent occupations or with meat-eating habits cannot come in close contact with Brahmin sacrifices, priests, or temples. But this kind of untouchability is not associated with those in violent occupations alone, but also with those high caste people in the period of Sutaka. So what I'm saying is, yes, there is an untouchability, and violence is one of the reasons why that is the case. But there is a nuance here. Sutakas are temporary impurities across castes which occur during birth, death, menstruation, and so on, resulting in untouchability, each of which must be waited out before normal interactions, occupations, or ritual activities can resume. Sutakas run for longer duration for those in violent occupations because they have greater impurities to resolve by performing longer expiations, whereas the higher castes have lower impurities to resolve because they're non-violent and are constantly expiating. By Dumas' logic of pure and impure, where Brahmins are at the top of the hierarchy because they maintain purity, purificatory periods for Sutakas must be longer for them. But this is not the logic at work. The expiations are mild and purificatory periods less because they are constantly expiating. The other kind of impurity called pataka is permanent and could be caste specific. It is a failure to preserve the rights of other varnas, a failing in one's duties, or simply unleashing violence. For instance, killing a Brahmin is a mahapataka for everyone. Fleeing the battlefield is a pataka for the Kshatriyas, and causing injury for the Brahmin, and so on. But what about Sutakas and Patakas is problematic, and why is birth a Sutaka? The answer is that all Sutakas and Patakas are violent events or phenomena, and therefore cause impurities. But violent how? The understanding of violence, I think, here is subtle. It has to do with the scattering or rupturing of the self, as it were, caused by anything disconcerting or painful, whether menstruation, birth, labor pains, deaths, or eclipses. Thus, purity is about restoring lost or disturbed selves, making them whole, reducing schizophrenia, increasing the sense of selfhood, and reaffirming the self's borders. The significance of the purificatory bath in this context is well brought out by Glucklich, 1994. Thus, violence may be defined as any form of disruption or dissonance that decreases the experience of the whole self. These disruptions are best understood as doshas or imbalances, a term used in Ayurveda, instead of the words ashaucha and ashubha. Translating doshas as guilt, as anthropologists have done, does not quite capture the import of primary sources. When violence is understood in this expanded way, we realize why chanting the Vedas when walking or visiting a temple with an open wound is prohibited. The crux of such rules is that one's occupation should not be performed in a disturbed state of mind or body. And expiation focuses on restoring this, especially the faculty of antahkarana or innocence, which acts as a moral compass. In the Dharma Shastras, expiations are prescribed more than punishments for crimes. That is, the effect of violence on the perpetrator was considered as seriously as it was on the victim. So then, cannot a lower caste person ever attempt moksha because of the impurities caused by their violent professions or eating habits? No, they can. When they graduate to higher levels of purity and are reborn as Brahmins and perform purifying sacrifices, they can. For that matter, Brahmins too are impure at birth and gain purity through Upanayana when they are considered reborn or dvijas. In fact, everyone is considered a Shudra at birth. We saw many of these facts presented today by the other presenters, so I won't go into those. In the schema charted above, losing caste meant going outside the system of interdependence, wherein other varnas took on your impurities through gifts or dakshinas. This is a kind of conscious karma transfer. The logic here is that those who already have a certain type of sin from an occupational violence can take on more of it from others and will not be adversely affected because they have the means to expiate them. This receiving of impurity is considered an altruistic or uplifting act in the long term, which allows for spiritual progress towards heaven or moksha. Since specific forms of violence have specific expiations, a separation of different degrees and kinds of violence had to be maintained. In addition, purity derived from non-violence was required to access divine aid. It is thus that Kumarila, in his commentary on the Mimamsa Sutras, sees the universalization of ahimsa as destabilizing Vedic Dharma. Conscious karma transfer through gifts might appear like scapegoatism to the modern eye, especially when there are instances of a well that can be dug by low caste people but becomes polluted when used by them. Yet, this is not an arbitrary usage of Brahminical ideology, because digging of the well is the duty of the low caste person. It is distinguished from the usage of water, which then may be used for rituals. Unlike river water, which is said to purify itself, wells are stagnant, taking on the karma of those using it. Thus, no one undergoing sutakas, even if they are Brahmins, can touch well water. And Dumo himself acknowledges that temporary and permanent impurity are identical in nature. Well, you could ask, why can't the Brahmins dig their own wells? But digging the earth involves violence, which is prohibited for Brahmins. Hence, the whole idea of separate water sources for different varnas. Several anomalies in the ritual purity theory of caste can be explained through a non-violence theory of caste. I'm retaining the word caste again, please bear with me. For instance, Dumo wonders why the carnivorous king outranks the vegetarian merchant. The king outranks the merchant because he takes on the karma of his subjects, lays down his life to protect them, consumes meat in order to be able to fight, and commits violence only for the protection and punishment of his subjects. It's not object. Of course, in certain regions, Vaishyas have risen to be the stronger castes because they have adopted the roles of kings by doing extensive charity, which also serves as an expiation. In certain regions, Kshatriyas are as powerful as the Brahmins, or even more powerful. If you look at Parry's work on Rajputs, this becomes evident, because their altruism and abdication of self-interest matches that of the Brahmins. That is, caste ranking was a dynamic system that allowed for mobility based on the amount of violence indulged in and the austerities undertaken to expiate. The regional contours of Varna Dharma can be explained when we formulate actions that consume resources as violence, as opposed to those that sustain. The occupational theory of caste by itself is inadequate to understand Jaati mobility, I think, unless guided by the expansive and subtle notions of violence and non-violence. I'm going to skip a little bit here. Also, while the ritual purity theory cannot explain why there are different kinds of priests who are not Brahmins, and each jati had its own priest, temple, and deity, or how everyone was a priest, as Hokart puts it, a violence-non-violence theory of caste can explain why association of certain kinds were scowled upon from both ends of the spectrum. Neither wanted the fruits of the specific violence of the other. Ambedkar almost recognizes the issue correctly when he views beef eating as the root of untouchability, listing castes that eat beef, but he shifts his focus to other issues rather quickly. Clearly, beef eating violated the cow that sustains more than it consumes. Recall here how the tribes of Biligiri and Ganabetta gave up meat eating to become like the Brahmins. And when M.N. Srinivas asked them why, they said they wanted to become like the Brahmins because they aspired for moksha. So if the Dharma texts prescribed expiations for crimes and not so much punishments, how was violence dealt with? Well, kings could punish crimes and provide justice, but ultimate justice was left to the principle of karma. That is, societies based in Varna Dharma did not unleash violence of their own. Instead, Varna Dharma existed as a way in which to problematize violence and control its damage on individual and collective selves. I'm almost done, just a few more things. Why does Varna appear to be birth-based? Because one has been acculturated to the occupational violence of the parents since childhood, which is hard to undo. Birth or lineage becomes important. I believe that this is the reason why occupations were mostly hereditary, but changes were not impossible. Another crucial question in Quigley's essay, how to explain the prevalence of caste in Christians and Muslims of the Indian subcontinent. My answer is that being a part of India's culture for several centuries now, Christians and Muslims have likely intuited that Varna Dharma has little to do with hygiene or other dogmas, but is concerned with something more fundamental: how occupational violence can disturb the wholesomeness of selves and sanity. That is, nothing divides the self as terribly as violence for the perpetrator, the victim, perhaps even for the bystander. But to say a little bit more, but this is not all there is to the story of Varna Dharma. Out of immense compassion for the three Shudras who lacked access to performing sacrifices, alternate practices of Tantra were born. They utilized violence and repulsive impurities as their foundation and worked with them. The Bhagavad Gita too offers another way in which one could escape the impurities of actions, that is through Karma Yoga, wherein actions must be performed without attachment to fruits and by surrendering to the deity. The Mahabharata acknowledges that some of the violent professions, such as hunting, were likely undertaken in order to provide for one's family. It therefore takes a kind view. It is likely that violent professions were the preference of some communities until then, because there was great prosperity. In Bhakti, Basava receives everyone into his devotional folds by inversing conventional definitions. He says, he who kills is a Madiga, he who eats impure food is a Holaya. It is thus too that Basava looks upon menstruation as simply biological, not disturbing selfhood, although painful. For one who has surrendered to a duty is detached from the body. My larger argument is that the Ashrama Dharma too is based upon the distinction between violence and non-violence. Recall, for instance, how a sannyasi vows to never harm any living being. And a vanaprasthi lives minimally on fruits and found food. So I'll end here and take questions if any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sushumna ji. I think Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi would have been very happy to hear your paper. Okay, thank you. Actually, your paper would have been fit in the line of Varna explaining papers by Sri Nitin Sridharji, Sri Shivakumarji, and it would have been fit there. Probably because of your time zone, we had to fit it into US time zone. That's why it came here. Thank you very much.